Today's subject is the mind, the worst enemy, and the best friends. Now, when we analyze our life, we can find that we mostly live at the mental level, not at the intellectual level. Most of our activities, thought currents, emotions take place at the mental level, not intellectual level. And sometimes you find there is a contradiction between what we want and what we pursue. I can give an example that may make things very clear. Most of us want to do good things, achieve great things, if possible, change the track of our life. When we read a great book, or when we listen to a good lecture, when we read a good poem, or when we interact with some people who can inspire us with great ideas, suddenly we feel, well, there are some unknown opportunities. There is a lot more scope for achieving great things. And perhaps I made a few mistakes in the past, and I can improve my lot. I can change my destiny. I can alter the course of my life by imbibing and practicing these new ideas. Many great books are there, not only religious books, mind you, not only Bible, Gita, or Zendavesta, or Dharmapada, many, not necessarily spiritual books, even books that inspire us, even books that sometimes inspire businessmen. 10 easy methods to become rich. 7 steps to success. All these, sometimes I'm talking about not necessarily spiritual ideas, but ideas that sometimes help people in their everyday work situations. Businessmen, executives, people who lead normal lives. So when we read these books, reading Dale Carnegie, for example, Making Friends in Business, and books like that, or reading the life of Lincoln, George Washington, many of these books sometimes supply new ideas, inspiring ideas. And immediately we feel, well, I must try to practice some of these ideas. And then we take a decision, and next day we start making an effort to put some of these ideas in practice. And then there is a deadlock. There's a big obstacle. Something within us doesn't allow us to move forward. The idea is good, and we feel we are capable of putting these ideas into practice. But the mind is not cooperating. The intellect has understood the idea, is convinced of its practicability or usefulness, but mind doesn't cooperate. So there is an internal conflict between mind and intellect. One aspect of this internal conflict was discussed in the last class, in the last Sunday class, that is the battle within, last week. Now I am going to take up another aspect of the same topic. In a way, this is a continuation of the same topic. So this battle within that we discussed in the last class, the battle between mind and intellect, that's what we are going to discuss right now. Of course, there is another battle battle between different emotions and ideas within mind, and battle between mind and intellect. So there is an internal conflict, a confrontation, a disharmony, a dichotomy, a lack of coordination and cooperation between what the intellect understands, perceives, and what the mind is willing to do. Now, in spiritual life, this problem is solved at another level. See, for example, when we read a book like the Bhagavad Gita or any great work, Bible or anything that you like, mind is not cooperating. Intellect, of course, understands the idea. So there's a gap between mind and intellect. Now, how to bridge this gap between the mind, between where we stand mentally and where we should reach, and where the intellect stands? This problem is solved through the practice of 4 important disciplines in spiritual life. I will deal with this problem in secular life. Now, right now, I am focusing on how to solve this problem in spiritual life. So, in one of the great classics of Vedanta by Shankaracharya called Viveka Chudamani, he recommends 4 steps to bridge the gap between the mind and intellect, to reconcile the conflicts of the mind and intellect. The first step that he recommends is a proper discrimination. Discrimination here means a discerning mind, an ability to apply our discerning faculties, proper rational understanding of what is actually real and what is not so very real. Nitya anitya vastu viveka. This is the Sanskrit term that Shankaracharya uses. Nitya means real. Now, in spiritual tradition, when we use the word nitya or real with capital letter R, it means something that is eternal, immortal, a spiritual ideal which transcends time, space, and causation. An idea or a spiritual ideal that is relevant for all times, not just a momentary impulse. Sometimes when we listen to a great spiritual lecture, or sometimes when we go to a department store, a supermarket, we are attracted towards an object, a very ordinary, perishable object in the market, and when we listen to a lecture, we may be attracted towards an idea which may not have much spiritual significance, but which may be attractive, something related to making this physical life more prosperous. Now, at this level, can we try to think a little deeper? Well, is this going to last forever? Is it nitya? Nitya means real or eternal. Not eternal in the spiritual sense, not Atman necessarily. So there you find we often try to go for what gives us momentary pleasure, momentary enjoyment, momentary sensation. At that time, we must use our discerning mind and we must go for something that is eternal. Something which is less relative, something which is more lasting. Now, in spiritual philosophy, there is only one eternal reality, that is spiritual enlightenment. Physical pleasure comes and goes. Even health Though it is certainly a very desirable thing, it comes and goes. Even at that level, you can see this the real unreal discrimination. People go for chocolates, people go for junk food, which may be very attractive if you judge by taste. But a doctor who has a much more rational understanding of the worth of food will tell you it is not nitya. If you take more healthy food, it is more nitya. The other food is anitya, means it is perishable. Because the taste or sensation, the enjoyment that we derive by eating this ordinary junk food will end the moment it vanishes from the mouth. Then it's no more there. But after that, it is only misery. On the other hand, if you take normally healthy food that is sustaining, that is nutritious, it is more nitya, more real. I am just giving an example of this real unreal discrimination at the most mundane level, not the spiritual level or philosophical level. Now, at the spiritual level, Vedanta says this body is the most easily perishable thing in the world. It is the most unreal thing in the world. But that is the only thing that we normally care for in our day-to-day activities. That is the great tragedy. We consider this body, which is certainly the most perishable thing in this world, we consider this as the most important, most imperishable. We may read the book. Any intelligent person, educated person understands this body is not eternal, or the sensory pleasures are not eternal. This body and the sensory world, they are actually two aspects. At the micro level, we have this body. At the macro level, we have the world outside. Both are equally perishable. But somehow, the mind tells us this body is the only reality. The sensory pleasures are the only reality. And when we read a book on Vedanta or philosophy or ethics or any book or when we listen to any idea that gives a transcendental glimpse of what we really are, then we understand, well, there is something beyond even this body, beyond even this mind, beyond the intellect. And that is the reality, the absolute reality. In Vedanta we call Atman. So Shankaracharya says, first we must be able to discriminate, discern between what is just momentary, between something that gives us only momentary satisfaction and something that goes beyond the present moment, that gives us more everlasting satisfaction, contentment. Now, if we can develop this faculty, then the gap between mind and intellect slowly gets bridged. This is our first step. Now, talking about the gap between mind and intellect, I can give a few more examples, few more ideas. Most of the problems of crime, as a good number of them, because people are not able to bridge this gap between mind and intellect. At least 70% of criminals, except indoctrinated, hardened criminals, ordinary criminals, repent after their criminal activity. They do not really aspire to become criminals. Sometimes people go to prisons, they teach the Bible, and in many prisons in this country, even today, they are teaching meditation, yoga, and that gives them a momentary glimpse of what it is to, glimpse of peace, harmony within. But then immediately, that glimpse, that momentary experience of blissfulness, which they feel when they practice yoga or meditation or when they listen to spiritual ideas, it goes away and mind comes back. Our natural habits and characteristics come back to the surface and take over our personality. So Shankaracharya says, every human being should try to develop this faculty of discriminating between what is just momentary and what is everlasting in our life. That is the first qualification. And before he begins this description, he says the human birth is the most wonderful thing that we can think of. According to Vedantic tradition, human birth is something very precious. It is not something that's easily available. According to the principles of reincarnation, whether you believe or not, reincarnation is one of those great truths that cannot be proved in the laboratory of science, but is much more intimately and really felt as a fact of experience in our life. Now, according to that, when we leave this body, when the mind becomes totally helpless, when the body loses its faculty and vitality, all the thought currents that we have accumulated in our mind come to the surface. All the thought currents. I gave the examples of the dying man, how he was saved. When a few times I have given on the same platform, how a good deed that a dying man did some time in the past suddenly came to his mind. Suddenly he remembered, and that saved his life. That ensured easy death for him. Of course, I am not going to repeat this again. So when people die, what really happens is physical faculties become completely weakened. And mind in its true nature comes to the surface. In ordinary life, even when you are suffering from bitter stomach pain, you can smile when you are when you are engaged in a business transaction. You cannot express the pain on the surface. Two diplomats representing two hostile nations may smile and shake hands. We think they are the best friends in the world. But really, they may be planning to declare war. When you can see the pictures of Chamberlain and Hitler shaking hands just before the Second World War in 1939 and 38, Berlin. So, if you see the picture, the photo, you find both Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler are the best friends of the world. So much of attractive smile. But this smile is not possible when when we die. Because mind loses its ability. So what our natural instincts accumulated in the mind come to the surface. Now what really happens? The real personality comes to the surface. So Shankaracharya says, this mind, these thought currents that dominate our personality at the time of death decide the next life. And if those thought currents are not conducive to spiritual life, then people will be born at subhuman levels or as members of the animal kingdom. Of course, we need not bother much about this mythological aspect of the story. But what I am going to drive home is, Shankaracharya stresses that human birth is something very precious and very important. And it is a great opportunity to evolve further to a divine dimension. So, from the animal kingdom to human birth, and from human level to the divine level. These are the levels of evolution. So, from the human level, if we work hard, we can evolve further and reach the divine dimension. So, from man to God, from animal to man, and man to God. Swami Vivekananda in modern times interpreted yoga as the art of lifting consciousness from the animal to man and from man to God. That is the idea. We will come to that later. Now, so Shankaracharya says that human birth is very precious, and the first qualification for doing justice to this great rare privilege is to develop the faculty of discrimination, a discerning mind between what is perishable, what is relatively insignificant, and what is spiritually more worthy, more everlasting. And the second qualification that he gives is one should have the ability to practice internal and external discipline. Peacefulness, contentment, and self-control, and the ability to divert our five senses into creative channels. The senses are always dragging the mind towards external objects. Mind is always at the mercy of the senses. The unique aspect of man, human beings, is that at every moment, all the five senses are simultaneously dragging the mind towards external objects, sensory objects, which prevent us from actually practicing, from doing what we really want to do. Most of us face this problem. We want to do some noble deeds. We want to do some wonderful things. We want to read some wonderful books. We take a decision that from now onwards or tomorrow onwards, we will start practicing some new values. But when the moment comes, something prevents us from actually implementing our decisions. The mind, the natural instinctive pull of the mind suddenly comes to the surface and prevents us. This internal conflict is very common for all human beings. There are only two types of human beings who do not have this internal conflict. The one type of people are highly evolved souls. The Buddhas, the Christ, the Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Shankaracharya, Viveka, all the great spiritual personalities belonging to any religious tradition, any national, cultural or religious tradition. All these great spiritual personalities, spiritual men and women, have transcended this conflict within. This contradiction between mind and intellect. And then there is another group of people who never worry about these conflicts, who take life as it comes, and who are not very different from the members of animal kingdom. For them, this body is the only thing, senses are the only things that count, and this world, its pleasures, its momentary physical pleasures, they are the only things to be aspired for. They also don't worry about these conflicts. But those who are intelligent, those who are little evolved, those who are conscious of what it means to lead a life of intelligent human beings, they feel this conflict. So if somebody tells you, well, I feel that I am not making enough progress in spiritual life, it means that person is a sincere seeker. If somebody tells you, well, I am perfectly happy, I have no problem, either he should be a Saint Francis of Assisi or he may be a professional thug, a murderer or a robber. They have no problem. Hardened criminals have no problem. They are perfectly reconciled. And also the great mystics, they have also no problem. There also is reconciliation. Two levels, two types of reconciliation. Those who have not even started their evolutionary process have no problem. And those who have reached the highest goal of spiritual evolution, the great mystics, they also have no problem. So the third qualification which Shankaracharya mentions is, we must not have any desire for material enjoyment. It simply means those who look upon physical or material enjoyments as their only goal in life cannot make spiritual progress. People have to live in this world. There is nothing wrong in living this world. You have to look after your duties and responsibilities. But every spiritual seeker should keep in mind that the senses are not the only things to be pampered. The sensory objects are not the only things to be sought after. There is something beyond all this. This idea of the beyond, the transcendental, the higher spiritual goal keeps us on the right track. And the fourth great qualification that he emphasizes is a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment. Here also we use the word desire. Generally it is stated that desire for sensory objects, desire for worldly enjoyments, to the detriment of any spiritual values, can lead to spiritual slavery. Freedom to the senses, license to the senses, leads to spiritual slavery. But freedom from the senses, from the tyranny of senses, leads to spiritual freedom. Now, Vedanta gives a very harmonious ideal of integrating the problems in this world and the highest spiritual ideal. To drive home this idea, I can just give an example from an important story from the Mahabharata. We have already discussed Mahabharata as a great classic many times, so I need not introduce again. It's a great classical work, more than 100,000 verses, and Bhagavad Gita, the great spiritual classic, is only just one fraction of this large classical work. Why I am referring to this story? This story tells us that this spiritual harmonization, this spiritual harmony within can be practiced by anybody, not necessarily by monks or mystics or ascetics, but even by people who are leading ordinary life in this world, whether you're working in a factory, in a business, or a marketplace. So I just give an example of a great teacher who practiced this highest spiritual ideal in his daily life. And I would tell you at the beginning itself, the teacher, you know what his profession is. He was a butcher by profession. His job was every day he used to get up, go about hunting animals, kill them, go to the marketplace, and sell the meat. That was he was a butcher, professional butcher. And he is a great spiritual teacher mentioned in this Mahabharata. The story opens like this. There was a great saint, a great spiritual seeker, let us say. A person who left his home, left all social and family obligations, and went to a forest and meditated there for years, several years. In course of time, he became a great ascetic. He got many miraculous powers, and he was highly respected. So one day, as usual, he was sitting under the tree, immersed in meditation. But suddenly some dry leaves fell on his head from the top of the tree. And he looked up, he found a crane and a crow fighting among them. So as they were making a lot of noise, and some tiny twigs and dry leaves fell on this ascetic's head, this monk's head. He was a mendicant, mind you. He was not an ordinary householder. He had left his home as a small boy, went to a forest, learned how to meditate, how to practice spirituality from a great teacher, from a great saint, and lived in that forest for several years. And his name became well known all around, and he was highly respected. So one day, as this happened, when he found that two birds were fighting among them above the tree, and as a result, his meditation was disturbed, and some tiny twigs and dry leaves fell on his head. He looked up and said, and these two birds were burned to ashes. So he congratulated himself. He had acquired some mystical powers, some miraculous powers. Now, in Vedantic tradition, miracle is a liability, not a merit. Miraculous powers are not the criteria for sainthood or spirituality, spiritual enlightenment. Rather, if a saint parades or performs miracles or makes use of those powers, he'll be condemned as a person who are deviated from the higher spiritual progress. So, but this man did not know. So he was very happy when he found that he had developed these miraculous powers, as a result of which, at one glance, these two birds burned to ashes. And then in the evening, he got up from his seat and started going about as a mendicant, just as the Franciscans during the Middle Ages, in ancient India also, monks used to go about the morning or the evening, asking for alms. So, this man with a begging bowl, you must have seen the pictures of Buddhist monks in ancient times with a begging bowl going about. They won't accumulate anything. Once they get enough, one meal at the most, they will return. They won't ask, they won't go about begging again. So this man, as usual, went about begging with his begging bowl, and reached a nearby home, a few miles away in a village. And as usual, he shouted alms. Just as Middle Ages, alms for St. Francis like that. Bhavati bhiksham dehi. This is a Sanskrit expression that they used to use in ancient times, which means give alms to the mendicant. Now, 2-3 times he repeated this. And then a voice came from within the house, telling him, "Please wait for some time, my son." That was a lady's voice. Now, this man got annoyed. He thought of himself as a great spiritual person because he had developed these miraculous powers. So he got annoyed, he got angry. What? How dare you, wretched woman, asking me to wait? He didn't say anything, but this thought crossed in his mind, flashed in his mind. The moment this thought flashed in his mind, another voice came from within the house. "My dear boy, there are no crows or cranes in this home for you to burn to ashes." That surprised this mendicant. So this lady knows what I did to those two birds 3-4 miles away. How did she come to know of this? He wondered. He became humble. Now you can see the transformation. In spiritual life, humility is very important. Spiritual pride is much more damaging than pride in material enjoyments, according to Vedantic tradition. That's why before we start practicing meditation, breathing exercises, or concentration, we have to establish ourselves in certain fundamental internal discipline like humility, absence of greed, truthfulness, non-violence, chastity, contentment, and so on. If any spiritual seeker who is full of greed and ambition tries to practice meditation, he may become more greedy. Because meditation of any kind of these internal spiritual practices hyperactivates, energizes whatever natural tendencies we have within our mind. I can give an example. Suppose a person who is violent by nature, if he starts practicing a lot of pranayama and meditation, before making any effort to control his mind and practice non-violence, that person who is naturally prone to violence may become much more violent. Because these practices generates energy, dynamism, and heat, which hyperactivates whatever tendencies we have already in the mind. That's why in yogic tradition, they emphasize yama and niyama, two types of disciplines before the practice of meditation or breathing exercises. Prayer is the only spiritual practice that one can begin with, because prayer takes care of everything. Prayer also helps us to practice certain internal disciplines. See, non-violence, truthfulness, absence of greed, chastity, and then contentment, harmony within. See, these are some of the qualities that one should practice. Now, what happened was, this saint had practiced meditation, but he was not fully established in these 10 important spiritual disciplines. Because the practice of these spiritual disciplines narrowed the gap, or it bridged the gap, it will bridge the gap between mind and intellect. Mind may not be ready for the higher spiritual practices, but the intellect has read books and listened to lectures. And before the mind is ready, we are slowly trying to practice higher spiritual disciplines. That creates conflicts in the mind. So this yogi who practiced meditation for such a long time without practicing contentment, humility, and truthfulness, and absence of greed, he became annoyed and angry when the lady within the house told him to wait for some time. And that also made him proud of his little miraculous powers. I mean, he was able to burn to ashes the two birds above. But he became humble immediately. That's because he had read these books. Intellectually, he knew that one should practice humility, devotion, politeness, all these values. Intellectually, he knew. But he had not brought those values to his mental level. That's why he was able to practice introspection for a moment and realize that he made a mistake by being arrogant, and this arrogance made him feel angry within. This lady makes me wait outside her gate, expecting alms. So he became humble. So when the lady came out, he asked her, well, could you tell me how you came to know of what I did to those two birds? What is the source of your power? What is the source of your wisdom? Without seeing what I did this morning to those two birds, you already knew. Then the lady said, look here, my boy, I don't know Vedanta or yoga. But I do my duty in all sincerity, humility, and with total unselfishness. I am a housewife. I have got an aged sick husband and old parents. I am looking after them. That's the only thing I am doing. And I don't expect anything. I do this as my humble duty and responsibility. And I have no selfish desire. I am completely free from any kind of selfishness or egoism. This is my duty. I do this as my offering to God. This is my offering to God. Instead of doing worship, I offer my act of service to my old husband and my parents as my act of worship. Now, every bit of this practice of unselfish duty, made her, took her closer to the highest spiritual wisdom. So she could understand what was happening in the mind of the mendicant. Now remember, this mendicant also was not a very ordinary man. He had sincerely practiced meditation, introspection. That is why he could feel that he made a mistake. Very often, if you tell certain people that they made a mistake, they never realize it. That's because they have never made even a sincere effort to practice any ethical spiritual value. But those who have made a sincere effort and may have perhaps committed errors will realize if you tell them. That's the main difference between people who are totally unevolved, who have not even started their spiritual journey, and those who have made some progress in their spiritual life. Those who have made some progress in their spiritual life do realize when you tell them, well, they have made a mistake, and they will go ahead. So this mendicant became very humble, very polite, and asked her, who taught you? Who is your teacher? So you can imagine a mendicant who has left his home, went to a forest, meditated, learns his lessons from an ordinary housewife. And then he asked this housewife, well, who is your teacher? Then the housewife tells him, oh, you want to know about my teacher? There is a man, his name is Vyatha. He is living a little away from here. She gave some directions. Little away in the markets. You go there and ask for this particular person. People will direct you to him, and you can learn from him more than what you learn from me. Now this saint immediately he became somewhat enlightened. That's why he was humble enough to follow the instructions of this housewife. So he went there to the marketplace, and there he asked for directions, and people took him to a shop of a butcher. Vyatha is the name of Vyatha. Now butchers are traditionally looked down upon by the so-called elite sections of society, because their job is to get up in the morning, go about hunting animals, kill them, and sell the meat. So this man went there. He was shuddered, he was shocked that this lady had directed him to go to a butcher. And when he reached there, the butcher did not even look up to him. He was busy cutting the animals and maybe weighing the meat and selling to his customers. Without looking up to him, he said, oh, that lady sent you here. All right, you sit here for some time. Right now I'm busy. Now this saint was still more shocked. So this butcher knows who has sent me here. Remind you, The story must have taken place at least 6,000 years back. So there was no communication. And the saint must have traveled several miles from the forest to the village where he went for alms to this lady's home, and still several miles more to the marketplace where he met this meat seller, the butcher. And after he had sent away all the customers, he knew satisfying the customers who had come to his shop for meat is a much more important thing for him to do than teaching this mendicant. Because in Sanskrit it's called Swadharma, one's own duty and responsibility. It's called Swadharma. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives a teaching, Swadharme nidhanam sreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Our greatest spiritual fulfillment in life is in the performance of our own duties and responsibilities. Very often we feel, well, I won't do this, I would do that. Now, when we give up our own duties and responsibilities and try to do somebody else's work, we are defeating ourselves in two ways. We are blocking our own progress because we have already followed a track, our own Swadharma, our own appointed duties and responsibilities, which have come to us unsought, which is our duty to do. If a professor who is supposed to teach in a university goes somewhere else and starts doing this business, neglecting his duty as a teacher, and thinking that doing business is better, that person is not only defeating his own future, his own career, but is also doing an injustice to society as a whole. So you have to remember that's why Lord Krishna says, Swadharme nidhanam sreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Doing one's own duties and responsibilities. That is the only path to one's own self-fulfillment. Taking upon our shoulders other people's responsibilities, thinking that that's better, is not the path to self-fulfillment. It is a temptation. Sometimes we think that we can choose our own destiny as we choose fruits in a market. Well, I would rather buy orange rather than apple. We can choose between orange and apple, but we can't choose between our inherited faculties, inherited tendencies, and those of others. We have followed a track for several lives and reached this particular stage of evolution. So we had to follow the same track. So the butcher, in his long exposition of Vedanta, it is supposed to be one of the highest exposition of Vedanta. The instructions given by a butcher to a mendicant. He says, look here, this is my duty, I am doing to the best of my ability. When the butcher completed his instruction of high Vedanta philosophy, this mendicant asked him, you are such a learned wise man. So why are you living in this body, in this condition? You are a hunter and a butcher. Then butcher told him, well, this is my duty. I am doing my work with a sense of total detachment. This is my duty. That's why he did not even look up to him when he was busy satisfying the customers, selling meat to them. When he had completed that duty, when the customers had left the shop, the market, immediately he turned to this mendicant, sir, now what can I do for you? And he starts his long exposition. The essence of that teaching is this. Everyone should perform his own duties and responsibilities. Very often, it is a temptation to move away from one's own duties and responsibilities that creates conflicts within the mind. And the best way to come in to come into terms with, to reconcile the mind, to enjoy mental harmony and peace within is to do whatever allotted duties and responsibilities we have got with a sense of total detachment and unselfishness. Attachment and selfishness creates conflicts. The word attachment, I need some explanation. Here attachment means this obsession. That is what it may be. That should be modified. Otherwise the word attachment may be misunderstood. Without any obsession. A person who does his work with great obsession, selfish motive, selfish desires, very often plays foul games, sometimes becomes unfair, becomes unethical, becomes immoral when people become obsessed with their duties, responsibilities, and the fruits of their work, done with total selfishness. So unselfishness and non-attachment help us to come in terms with our own mind and enjoy peace and harmony within. These are some of the teachings that the great teacher Vyadha gave to the great mendicant. It is known as Vyadha Gita. I have not exhausted this topic. In fact, it is a very, very important subject of discussion to Mahabharata. We may deal with this subject some other time. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.